No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
A busy show tonight. It's Mark Dolan looking after the 8 o'clock slot all of this week. With a rumoured deal with the EU on the Northern Ireland Protocol in the offing, is a Brexit breakthrough on the cards? We'll get reaction from Jacob Rees-Mogg live in the studio. Plus, his reaction to Walkout Wednesday, as it's been termed, with civil servants, bus drivers, lecturers, rail workers and teachers all on strike today. And the strikes are the topic of my big opinion, which is coming shortly. Plus, were the authorities wrong to put us all in masks? As a shocking new study suggests they most likely had no effect. More on that shortly with The Spectator's Alex Marshall. Plus, fearless Fleet Street legend Kelvin MacKenzie live in the studio with his reaction to the industrial action. And why didn't Sir Keir Starmer mention the strikes at Prime Minister's Questions today? Why has he gone so quiet? Labour can't be afraid of the unions, surely. So, Jacob Rees-Mogg on the way, and on Walkout Wednesday, Britain isn't working, quite literally. That's my big opinion, which is straight after the headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Mark, thank you, and good evening to you. The top story on GB News today: hundreds of thousands of workers have been taking part in so-called Walkout Wednesday. It's the UK's biggest day of industrial action in more than a decade. Up to 500,000 people across 7 trade unions went on strike over pay, jobs and conditions. Teachers took part in the action along with Border Force officers and bus and train drivers, causing widespread travel disruption. Education Minister Nick Gibb described the strikes as disappointing.
It is disappointing that the NEU, one of those 4 unions, has taken strike action today, jeopardising children's education. They've already suffered 2 years of interruption during the COVID pandemic, so this is the last thing children need, and it's the last thing parents need. So I say, look, let's continue those talks about these important issues.
In Buckinghamshire, neighbours in Milton Keynes are holding a vigil tonight for a 4-year-old girl who was killed by the family pet dog. Thames Valley Police say Alice Stones was attacked in her own back garden yesterday. They described it as a tragic and isolated incident, and that the animal was put down by officers at the scene. No arrests were made. In news away from home, the FBI search for classified documents at President Joe Biden's beach house in Delaware, we can tell you, has now ended. His lawyer says agents didn't find any files with classified markings. The operation was part of an ongoing investigation into Biden's handling of classified documents. The FBI found some at his other home in Delaware last month. His former private office was also searched in November. And finally, Boris Johnson is urging Western leaders to further boost their support for Ukraine. Speaking in Washington earlier on today, he told senior politicians that President Volodymyr Zelensky should be given all the equipment he needs. He's asked them to supply fighter jets, which Downing Street has so far ruled out.
So God bless America for having the guts and the wisdom to help. And I implore you now to follow the logic of what you are all doing and give the Ukrainians the tools to finish the job. Give them the deep fire artillery systems, give them the tanks, give them the planes, because they have a plan. They know what they need to do, and my God, they've shown they have the skill and the bravery to do it.
Just one more piece of news to bring you. The divisive social media personality Andrew Tate will, we understand, remain in custody in Romania for at least another month. The kickboxer turned influencer is being held on suspicion of rape and human trafficking alongside his brother Tristan. Today, Romanian judges rejected an appeal against their detention. Andrew is best known for his controversial comments about women and was banned from major social media platforms as a result. That's it. You're up to date on TV online and DAB+ radio. You're with GB News. Now it's Mark Dolan sitting in for Laurence Fox.
Thanks, Polly. It's Mark Dolan in the 8 o'clock slot all of this week. Is a breakthrough on the Northern Ireland Protocol in the offing? If so, does this unleash the full potential of Brexit? Jacob Rees-Mogg is with me shortly, live in the studio with reaction. Also, were the authorities wrong to put us all in masks, as a shocking new study suggests they did nothing? And why didn't Sir Keir Starmer mention the strikes at Prime Minister's Questions today? Surely Labour aren't afraid of the unions, are they? We'll get to that shortly, but first, let's start with my big opinion. It's Walkout Wednesday, and it feels like the entire workforce has downed tools. I'm counting my blessings that cameraman Steve turned up for tonight's show. Britain isn't working, quite literally. And right now, not working is being leveraged as a political tool with the teaching unions, the nursing unions, the ambulance workers, lecturers, posties, firefighters, civil servants, bus drivers, you name it, all holding the government and the country to ransom for inflation-busting pay rises that the country simply cannot afford. Now, I completely understand that nurses, teachers and the rest are struggling, and they do an incredible job for the country. They deserve a pay rise. And the unions, of course, are simply doing their job, trying to get their people the best possible deal. Who could blame them? But anything above the 5% that's been offered to most unions, money the private sector would bite your hand off for, is economically illiterate, immoral and deeply irresponsible. The main reason why millions of Brits are struggling is because of inflation, which raises the cost of basic goods like energy and food, and which reduces the value of the pound in your pockets and the size of your wage packet. It's a perfect storm. But to subsidise the public sector against rising prices is effectively to conduct an arms race with inflation, which doesn't end well. Wages go up, prices go up with them, and you bake inflation into the system for years to come. And be clear, a high inflation economy is a dying economy. Inflation is a tax on everyone. Sunak and Hunt, for their sins, are right that inflation is public enemy number one. Tackle that, and it unlocks so many of our economic problems. Lower inflation means cheaper goods, cheaper borrowing, both the government's and yours and mine, cheaper mortgages and a boost in the value of the pound in your pocket. Lose-lose becomes win-win. So inflation is the main argument against bumper pay rises. We've seen it throughout history, with Harold Wilson offering 20, 25 and 30% pay rises to compete with inflation and keep the unions happy. By doing this, you're effectively creating economic quicksand, and it's a race to the bottom. There's also the small matter of over £2 trillion worth of national debt. Any pay rises will come from borrowed billions. It's deeply unethical that future generations should pick up the tab for this, and it's dangerous to further expose Britain to the vagaries of Rolex-wearing financiers around the world, upon whose largesse we are now sadly reliant. Let me be clear that millions in the public sector and in the private sector deserve a pay rise. I believe that Britain is underpaid. The nurses, lecturers, teachers, you name it, they have suffered real terms pay cuts. They have a case, as do the unions. As many are suffering in-work poverty, there can even be a case made for the strikes. People are desperate. And of course, so many of these industries could have had a financial boost if it wasn't for what was, in my opinion, the catastrophically expensive and failed experiment of lockdowns, which, don't forget, saw the government pay healthy people to stay at home, covering 80% of their wages. We borrowed £500 billion and we shut the economy down on and off for 2.5 years and closed once viable businesses. And I don't remember any of the unions at the time pushing back on the idea of lockdowns or work-from-home orders, which damaged the economy too. Far from it. The unions were at the forefront of the hysterical culture of safetyism, which descended upon the public sector. It was the unions that clamoured for restrictions, arguing the safety of their members was paramount. And of course, it was the teaching unions who turbocharged pressure on the government to close schools, a policy that very few are now willing to defend. The government were clearly trying to save lives with lockdowns and other COVID measures, and they were trying to prevent the NHS from becoming overwhelmed. The measures were backed by the vast majority of respected scientists and health professionals. But, as I argued at the time, the cure looked to be worse than the disease itself. And I believe that history has judged that lockdown sceptic view very kindly. I always argue the worst aspect of the COVID measures was the economic damage. Why? Because no country ever improved the health of its people by making itself poorer. So here we are today, with many Brits struggling with a cost of living crisis and many relying on food banks. Well, I've been very clear since the spring of 2020. This experiment to stop a seasonal respiratory virus, non-fatal to most, would have dire consequences. Well, here we are. Above and beyond the economic madness of what the unions are currently asking for, there is a moral case against this industrial action too. No industrial action by nurses, ambulance drivers or firefighters should risk human life, but clearly it does and it will. How is that acceptable? And no industrial action on the part of teachers should impact children, but of course it will. Have kids not suffered enough from school closures during the pandemic? My kids are in the state sector and they've been stuck at home all day like thousands. The only thing they've probably learned today is how to murder hookers and gangsters on Grand Theft Auto. How can closed schools, a restricted ambulance service, nurses absent from wards and firefighters off duty possibly be acceptable? The economic and moral case for the strikes is non-existent. Perhaps we should just bring in the army to run the whole country. Sadly, they're not big enough these days. Britain isn't working, and it doesn't look like that will change anytime soon. Let's get reaction to Walkout Wednesday, as it's being called by the political editor of the Express Online, David Maddox. Hi, David.
Hi, Mark. How are you?
Great to have you on the programme. Very well. Is this a nightmare for Rishi Sunak or an opportunity?
I think it's clearly an opportunity for him. I mean, the man is... he hasn't got many opportunities at the moment. He's under siege from his own party. He's down in the polls, but there's nothing like having a clear enemy to fight. And you know, the unions are doing him a favour, really, I think. And you were asking the question, why did Keir Starmer not mention the strikes in Prime Minister's questions today? Well, there's a clear answer to that. Firstly, he's embarrassed by it. He's embarrassed by what the left is doing. And secondly, of course, he's in the pay of those unions, and he can't possibly criticise them. So, you know, that's the answer there. And, of course, Sunak's using this every Prime Minister's questions now to great effect.
Does the collective nature of this industrial action, given the fact that multiple industries are involved, does it feel orchestrated at all to you, David?
I think so, especially today, and some of the things over Christmas as well were clearly orchestrated. And even if you go back to October, when the RMT decided to have a special strike around the weekend of the Conservative Party conference, if you remember that far back. But I want to pull you up on something you said in that excellent monologue of yours. You said all workers. No, it wasn't all workers. This is almost entirely public sector workers who are, you know, maybe not the best paid, but actually get a reasonable salary, pretty good salary, above average salary, guaranteed pay rises, proper pension arrangements, which most of us in the private sector would just dream of, to be honest. So, you know, this is, but of course, many of them are on the left in the public sector, and this has a feeling of a political strike to it, more than a pay one.
Great to have you back on the show, David Maddox. We'll catch up again soon. David Maddox is the political editor of the Express Online. Now, coming up, as it's reported that Brexit and EU negotiators are on the cusp of reaching an agreement over the Northern Ireland Protocol, we'll be joined by former Business Secretary Jacob Rees-Mogg. Plus, were the authorities wrong to put us all in masks, as a shocking new study suggests they did nothing? Quelle surprise. And why didn't Keir Starmer mention the strikes at Prime Minister's questions? Surely Labour aren't afraid of the unions. We'll be asking Kelvin Mackenzie about that later. But next up, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Are we on the cusp of a Brexit breakthrough?
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back.
Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind, and we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236. And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why didn't Sir Keir Starmer mention the striking unions at Prime Minister's Questions today? We'll get to that shortly. This is Mark Dolan with you at 8 o'clock all of this week. Now, it's the 1st of February and a new month starts with potentially some good news. The Times newspaper report that Britain and the EU have struck a deal that could resolve the issue of the Northern Ireland Protocol, which places a border down the Irish Sea. The Times understands that Brussels has accepted a proposal that would avoid the need for routine checks on products destined for the province. Alongside this, the EU has reportedly conceded for the first time that the European Court of Justice could rule on issues relating to the province only if a case was referred to by the Northern Irish courts. Previously, Brussels had insisted the European Commission should be able to take cases straight to the court. An insider has said the EU has moved a lot from its original position. This deal won't delight anyone, but the hope is it will satisfy enough people. EU sources have played down these claims and simply said it's not true. Well, there you go. Does this possible deal satisfy one of the most high-profile Brexiteers in the country, the Conservative MP for North East Somerset, and GB News' very own Jacob Rees-Mogg? Hello, Jacob.
Hello, good evening.
Is this potentially good news? Is this a game changer or fool's gold?
The devil will be in the detail, as always. So you get a headline saying they're close to an agreement, but what have they agreed? And the European Court is a symptom rather than the actuality of the problem. What it's about is, does EU law apply in Northern Ireland? And if it does, is that acceptable to the unionist community, particularly as represented by the DUP? And that's the DUP's biggest concern. They think that Northern Ireland democracy outside the European Union should not have laws imposed upon it that are then ultimately, even if by second degree, ruled upon by a court outside the United Kingdom. And from what you read out, it doesn't sound as if they've got there. If the DUP doesn't support it, then power sharing won't come back. If power sharing doesn't come back, then this deal doesn't really help.
Indeed, the DUP have their 7 tests for the resolution of this issue. A source speaking to the Times suggests that it could be fulfilled, that the DUP will accept this deal. Do you think there's a chance they will?
Well, as I say, it depends on the detail of what is in it. But the key for the DUP is that EU law doesn't apply in Northern Ireland without any democratic oversight of the people of Northern Ireland, and that the United Kingdom remains intact, and that goods can go freely from GB to Northern Ireland that are not in any question of going into the single market.
Yeah.
I personally think it would be better to proceed with the bill that is before the House of Lords, which would provide a solution to this, would provide a green lane for all goods going into Northern Ireland from GB that are not likely to be sent on to the Republic.
Yes, indeed, although at the moment Brussels don't seem to be willing to go that far. It looks like, going into some of the detail, the UK government have negotiated a system here, if it happens, of green and red lanes. So goods testing for Northern Ireland will be allowed. Goods coming into Northern Ireland will be allowed without routine checks. Goods going for onward export to the Republic would face customs formalities in Northern Irish ports. Now, that gets rid of the hated border down the Irish Sea, doesn't it?
Well, routine checks or non-routine checks between goods that are going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland that won't go on to the Republic is still quite an issue, because if goods go from Somerset to Wiltshire, they don't get subject to checks, do they? And is Northern Ireland fully part of the United Kingdom, or isn't it? That is the fundamental issue which the unionists will have to be satisfied by.
How urgent is a resolution of this issue?
I think it's very pressing, because the union is a constitutional union, but it's also an economic union. And it's crucial that the economy of Northern Ireland is not harmed by the Northern Ireland Protocol.
And of course, by possibly digging their heels in on this, Brussels risk restarting the Troubles, because there are great tensions in Northern Ireland within the unionist community about what's happening.
Well, that's very important that you make this point, because the protocol accepts that the Good Friday Belfast Agreement is superior to it. And therefore anything that risks that means that the protocol can be overridden, and that is within the text of the protocol, which was itself meant to be temporary. And that's why there is a strong legal argument in favour, in international law, of passing the bill that is before Parliament.
Notwithstanding the detail of this, and you're right, the devil is in it, do you detect that the mood music is changing on both sides now? Do you feel that there is momentum behind a resolution?
Well, it's encouraging that people are having these discussions, but as far as I'm aware, Mr Šefčovič's mandate from the European Union to negotiate has not been changed, and until that is changed, how can you come to a conclusion? So there may be positive signs, there may be a little glimmer of optimism, but I wouldn't be running up the flags yet.
Staying on Brexit, but indirectly, a gloomy economic outlook from the IMF announced yesterday. Lots of different factors, including our exposure to gas prices. Of course, we've got inflation, lots of other issues. But Brexit came up. Do you think that the challenges we have economically are in any way related to it?
Slightly less noticed in the IMF's figures was that they actually upgraded the growth that they had expected for 2022, and they have got their forecasts for the UK economy wrong every single year since 2016, and always they've been too gloomy. So I wouldn't back IMF forecasts. They're not really very valuable. Does the UK economy face headwinds? Yes, of course it does. Interest rates are rising. There is a difficult global background. But in 2021 and 2022, the UK economy grew faster than almost all other major economies. We were actually really rather strong. So we grew faster than the US, than Germany, than France, much faster than Japan. So I wouldn't be too gloomy, and I wouldn't take the IMF's forecasts as gospel.
Therefore, are you more optimistic about the year ahead economically for the country?
There are some good signs that inflation may be peaking, and therefore the rate of rise of interest rates is likely to have peaked and may, even by the end of the year, begin to reverse, that the government's tax revenues are shooting up, partly because of fiscal drag caused by the inflation, so there may be some flexibility within the Treasury for the long hoped-for tax cuts. So yes, things could be beginning to perk up, and other countries' economies are picking up a bit too.
Do you think the Chancellor and the Prime Minister will move on tax cuts this year?
I think it's going to be difficult for them to, because they set their stall out so clearly as being in favour of higher taxation in the autumn statement. Now, I happen to think that we need to reduce both taxes and public expenditure, that the state has got too big, but you do need to do both sides of it.
So if you were Prime Minister, you would be reducing taxes at this point?
Well, I certainly wouldn't be in favour, I never have been in favour, of the increase in corporation tax. I've always thought that that was a mistake.
Will the taxes that are in place, which of course are approaching the highest level since the war, are they going to dent economic growth? Could they provoke a recession?
Well, taxation always dents economic growth because, broadly speaking, individuals spend their own money better than the government spends it for them. You have to have some level of taxation to pay for the public services that people want. So there's a balance to be found, but do I think that the highest tax rate of 70 years is the right balance? No, I don't. We need to get back to lower rates of taxation within the economy.
What's your message to the public sector workers on strike today? Lecturers, teachers, bus drivers, rail workers, many thousands of people have downed tools. What would you say to them, particularly those who are going to food banks to make ends meet and to survive?
I would encourage them to get back to work, that the effect they are having, particularly teachers going on strike, on people who earn less than they do, is serious. Some people earning less than teachers have had to give up a day's pay to look after their children. That this is a very selfish thing to be doing. New pay rounds will be beginning for 2023. Inflation has now come through the system, whereas when the pay rounds were first being discussed last year, we hadn't reached the peak of inflation. So I think it should be in this year's discussion rather than a retrospective look at last year's discussion where the answer needs to be found.
Do you support Rishi Sunak's approach to the industrial policy at the moment and how he's approaching these strikes?
Yes, I think he's doing the right thing. I don't think he can possibly give in to these demands for pay increases, which would in and of themselves be inflationary because they would lead to more government borrowing, which would be a fiscal stimulus that the state can't afford.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, can't wait for the news show.
I'm looking forward to it.
So much anticipation.
I'll have to interview on my
I'd
show.
be honoured. I'd love to be grilled by Rees-Mogg, I've got to say. You're a hero to many of our viewers, and we look forward to the show, which is, of course, appearing on your screens imminently. My thanks to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Still to come, more reaction to Walkout Wednesday and the mass industrial action, which has seen bus drivers, train drivers, teachers, almost everybody down tools in the public sector, that is. And why was Keir Starmer so reluctant to mention the strikes at PMQs today? I'll be asking Fleet Street legend Kelvin McKenzie, who's live in the studio. But next, were the authorities wrong to put us all in masks, as a shocking new study suggests they did nothing? There's a surprise. More on that next.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe.
Bring it on!
Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous.
Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Welcome back to the show. Mark Dolan with you at 8, all of this week, tonight and tomorrow. A wide-ranging review into physical interventions used to control COVID-19 during the pandemic have found that wearing masks in the community, and I quote, probably makes little or no difference to the outcome of illnesses like COVID-19 compared to not wearing masks. This review added that harms around the mask wearing were rarely measured and were poorly reported. Now, this paper, entitled The Cochrane Review, is authored by a variety of epidemiologists and evidence-based scientists, including Eliana Peroni from the Regional Centre for Epidemiology in Italy and Mark Jones at the Institute for Evidence-Based Healthcare at Bond University in Australia. The report was shared online earlier today by Carl Hennigan, the Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford University. Well, let's head to Australia and the Spectator's Alex Marshall, who's had a look at the detail. Hi, Alex.
Good morning.
Great to have you on the show. Alex, the masks don't work. I can't believe it.
Isn't it amazing that it's taken these guys a year to know what we already knew at the beginning of the pandemic, which was all the studies prior to COVID said that mask wearing for influenza-style diseases do not make any difference at all because of the way the infection transmits. And so now, after the whole tyrannical mask wearing that we had here in Australia, I'm not sure how bad it was in the UK, but they were pretty harsh here. They were throwing elderly gentlemen to the ground and causing heart attacks just from the way they were treating people in Australia. Well, it turns out that was all completely rubbish and unnecessary.
Indeed so. We actually had a former SAGE scientist on the programme, Dr. Colin Axon, a few months ago, and he said that he just didn't think that medics understood the scale of how this virus is. So, for example, that the virus particle is between 1,000 and 5,000 times smaller than one of the holes in a mask, especially those flimsy surgical masks that many have been wearing. But interestingly, the masks became political, didn't they?
Yes, well, look, we had a saying here in Australia that it was basically like erecting chicken wire to keep the mosquitoes out, because that was the equivalent of the mask definition. And we have seen that the mask wearing was very much a way of separating people. So if you didn't wear a mask, you were targeted by various institutions and authorities as being a dissenter, somebody who was worth excluding and looking into. And it became, even now, we still have people who wear masks, and if you don't wear it, our politicians are saying, well, you're a bad person and you're killing people. And that narrative hasn't stopped, regardless of how much research is done. And even studies like the one that you're quoting today are not making any dent in our political narrative here in Australia.
Indeed. I mean, do you think we are stuck with masks for the foreseeable future? Do you think they're just part of life now?
Well, the Japanese Prime Minister was begging his people to stop wearing masks because Japanese take their health very seriously, and the fear embedded their culture far more than anybody else's. And so they now have an issue trying to walk that back. But with Australia, pretty much we've stopped wearing masks. It's really we call them the teal voters, the elderly women who are quite affluent who also vote green for the eco-fascism. They like their masks and they're never letting them go, as do the uni students. But there's definitely a political divide in mask wearing that seems to have very little to do with health and a lot more to do with political obedience.
There you go. Well, look, to be fair to governments, they were trying to save lives and stop hospitals being overwhelmed. So perhaps even a marginal contribution will have been worth it if it prevented the spread slightly. Plus, many felt comfortable and reassured at the height of the pandemic when people wore masks. So many medics and scientists will argue that the masks did offer some protection and were worth it. Well, it's all about opinions, isn't it? Alex, Novak Djokovic, the tennis player, has won the Australian Open. A sweet victory. Tell me why.
This was extraordinary. Novak Djokovic's win at the Australian Open was not entirely about becoming the world's greatest tennis player. He was treated appallingly. Australia became a laughingstock on the world stage where we evicted Novak because of his bad character. Both Liberal and Labor politicians were worried that his presence in Australia could cause people to rebel against health orders, because how dare you have a conversation about, the vaccines or mask wearing, as we talk about. So we threw the world number one and our greatest Australian Open champion out. And so when he came back here and won, you might have noticed he collapsed into the crowd and sobbed openly because it was such a long road for him to fight our tyranny. And thank goodness he was able to, because he became somewhat of a figure for Australians against the tyranny that we had.
A quick word on a rather careless approach from the authorities to nuclear materials. Tell me more.
I only found out this morning that we're actually being mocked on the world stage regarding this when you sent me the link through. Basically, we lost a piece of radioactive material the size of a coin in an enormous desert that looks like Mars and is so radioactive that I'm surprised it doesn't glow at night in Western Australia, because we've got a third of the world's uranium and all the thorium, and this was a cesium capsule, and the authorities are like, this is a massive risk to public health. We're going, what, to the two people on the desert road in the middle of nowhere? I don't think so. We found it, and the solution is to fine people instead of fixing the road, which is what caused it to be lost in the first place, which tells you everything you need to know about how Australians solve problems. Just fine people. That will fix it.
Yeah, I used to be most worried about spiders in the Australian outback, but now it's nuclear reactors that have got me awake at night. Alex Marshall, brilliant to have you on the show. We'll see you in a week's time. Coming up, more reaction to today's industrial action. It's Walkout Wednesday, folks. So why was Sir Keir Starmer so reluctant to mention the strikes at Prime Minister's questions today? Surely he's not afraid of the unions. I'll be discussing that with Fleet Street legend Kelvin McKenzie. Kelvin's not happy about the strikes. Find out why after this.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's Mark Dolan with you all this week at 8. And if you're watching this, you're likely to be one of the millions affected by Walkout Wednesday, which has seen industrial action by teachers, civil servants, bus drivers, lecturers and rail workers. Odd, therefore, that the leader of the opposition seemed to have missed that topic during Prime Minister's questions. Instead, he focused on Nadeem Zahawi. Now, clearly the government have a case to answer in relation to Nadeem Zahawi and his tax affairs. But wouldn't you think that with hundreds of thousands of public sector workers all going on strike in one day, that might have cropped up in the conversation? Why is Keir Starmer so reluctant to talk about the strikes? A man that I suspect has the answer is former national newspaper editor, entrepreneur and political commentator Kelvin Mackenzie. Kelvin, Keir Starmer strangely quiet about the strikes today.
Well, he's on a lose-lose. He's funded by these people. They are causing pain to people. And he doesn't want to be associated with the pain. He doesn't mind the money, by the way, from, the RMT and ASLEF. But can I just make one point? They're not going to win. And the funny thing is, those union guys, for the first time, now know they're not going to win. The railways, they can shut them down. Actually, we all seem to get to work, or we work from home, we do something. It's painful. We have to make adjustments to our lives. But we've been through COVID. We've had 2,000 a day dying. I don't give a damn about whether the RMT walk out forever and a day. Me, I'd reverse the pain. I'd lock these train companies down, and I'd say, when you want a job, come back, and you're coming back under these terms. The way that's happening now, they're dripping the pain into us and think, actually, we're doing you a turn because actually we're only going out on strike for the odd day or so. But actually, do you know what? We could go out for a month or so. I wish they would. They can't win. It's shocking that ambulance drivers can go on strike. And that doesn't seem to be a story anymore.
Yeah.
The teachers have a very good package. Average earnings, 40. In fact, there was no ECD report this morning, right? They work the least hours, bar Luxembourg, across the developed world and the EU, right? And they get paid in the top quartile of, on average, 15-year primary school teacher, 45,000 a year. Okay, it's not a king's ransom or a queen's ransom. I totally buy that. But it's not bad when you throw in their pension schemes. You can work. You can be ill for 6 months. You get paid. There's a whole load of things.
And they're not going to get sacked until they start killing children. Basically,
that is absolutely
it is
true.
a job for life, isn't it?
Yeah. No matter how inefficient stupid, poor teacher you are, you cannot get slung out. It's an amazing world. So the hope for me is that they get defeated. The problem about all this is that I don't know why Rishi does not get the credit for it. And I think it's because he's too decent a guy. I think what you need, unfortunately, right now, is somebody to be as vile towards ASLEF, the RMT, actually, and I say this with the heart, with even the nurses, just push it to them, right?
So a bit of trash talk.
I would love that. Good idea. In fact, and then if that fails, then they can become a GB News presenter.
Yeah, well, let's hope they don't stoop that low. The unions would argue that a lot of what they're fighting for is conditions. They would argue that these industries, including teaching, are having trouble with recruitment. People are leaving.
Can I just say about that?
And then one other quick thing, which is the idea of a real terms pay cut. So, yes, they're being offered 5%, but they're probably minus 15, 20% because of inflation.
I totally agree. That's for everybody. Do they think in some way that being a public sector worker is unique? You go to anybody, any ordinary person working in a factory, working for Amazon, working for this. No, we can't carry on matching inflation. Otherwise, all that will happen, we'll have inflation forever. And the people who suffer worse with inflation forever are their members. So take the pain, get yourself in good position to have a decent package this year. They won't do it. They want a battle to the death. We should give it to them.
Interesting stuff. Now, let's talk about the wider issue of the economy. Bad news from the IMF yesterday. But as Jacob Rees-Mogg pointed out on the show, the IMF's modelling has been about as reliable as a Nadim Zahawi tax return of late. It's got to be taken with a pinch of salt, hasn't it? So what do we think about Britain's economic prospects? Do you think it's become a national pastime talking this country down?
Certainly. Even, I would say, among Conservatives, there is a feeling that actually things have not done well. And one of the issues for here is that our benefit system is so incredible that actually it's nip and tuck about whether you should go and do 40 hours work and have to travel, and actually if you can get a train, have a travel, or actually say, I tell you what, I'll wait for the money to turn up from universal credit in my bank. And that's a shocker. So I'm just starting a little business. I want to hire people. It is impossible to hire anybody under the age of... Actually, do you know what? I am currently hiring people who are over 70, at least one anyway, and they have come right from... Although my business is based in Weybridge in Surrey, I'm hiring out of Harrogate and people working from home, etc., and stuff like that. This is good. I'm very pleased to be hiring these people. They are energetic. They want to do it. But what has happened to other people? There's no point in... COVID has changed the way people view life. They say, do you know what, I'm a long time dead. But if you're 50-odd, you're perfectly fit, you're able, you've got a brain on you. Why is it that they won't go to... Why is it they won't go to work anymore? What is it about them? And I'll tell you what, if you're a teacher, the employer has paid 23.5% of your pension. You have paid, if you're in commercial life, you get about 3 to 5% paid for it. So what are they doing? They get into their 50s, they retire. Fantastic. And by the way, inflation-proof pensions until they die. So the biggest queue is on cruise liners. You can always recognise all the teachers are there. They're rather poorly dressed, but they can afford the best suites.
Do you worry about the work culture in this country now? Because I actually think it relates to the pandemic. The messaging from the government of furlough, which is the government will pay 80% of your wages, pay you to stay at home. That's changed the mindset in this country, and that people have now, got a different attitude to work, as you've said. And in the end, this is the road to penury, isn't it? I mean, we're going to...
Right, OK, I absolutely guarantee, right, supposing Labour get in by the landslide that is being predicted right now, and to be honest, I think it'll be closer than that, but it may not be different from that. At the end of all that, 5 years of Labour writing an even bigger cheque, benefits cheque. Oh, are you skin? Are you skin? Oh, what's that? Oh, your right leg's dropped off, has it? Oh, right, well, here's this, right? All that, OK? Asia will eat our lunch. We will have no markets. We'll be kind of a North Korean economic wasteland, right? It's going to be a nightmare. And our problem is that we can't seem to get the young to believe that wealth creation is a great thing. I'm not saying that they're all the same, but there are enough issues in a factory now that you're scared to say, oh, I'm not quite sure how many hours can be done there. We're not sure about that. Whereas in Asia, they're just working their butts off. Very clever, and it is a massive problem for our country.
Your paper, The Sun, backed Tony Blair in 1997. Do you think there's any chance that Starmer will have their support in a couple of years' time?
Well, the good thing about Murdoch is he's not doing it out of any political view. He's doing it what will enrich me, right? Mind you, with old Blair, of course, he did quite well on the money, but not so well on the wife, if you know what I mean. Anyway, that's available through my lawyers. That so I don't know, but I do notice that
because I don't feel like there are any Keir Starmer fans out there, even on his own side. No one loves Keir Starmer, do they?
Right, so this is the issue. The Tories are up to their neck in whatever's going on.
The brown stuff.
The minute he gets in, it'll be his issue. He will be, without a shadow of a doubt, the most disliked Prime Minister in 50 years. He will be considered bumbling, he'll have no ideas, the thing will be a disaster.
Kelvin, always a thrill to have you in the programme, and good luck with the new project.
Thank
and
you.
all those over 70s that you've hired. Quite right, too. The silver pound is worth fighting for. Now, we put out a poll earlier in the show. Do you support the striking workers? And the results are in. 78% say no. And my mathematics tell me that 22% say yes. There you go. So the people have spoken and common sense has prevailed. My thanks for your company tonight. We're back tomorrow at 8, my last one of the week. But next up, the always unmissable Dan Wootton. Hi, Dan.
Hello, Mark. We have a bit of a blockbuster shows night. Lady Victoria Harvey on the issue of Prince Andrew, Catherine Birbalsingh, Britain's toughest head teacher on you know what, and Lee Anderson, who has been investigating the migrant crisis in France. He's going to be revealing his really shocking findings live.
Unmissable TV, Dan, thank you so much for that. Dan is live at 9. It's my last one of the week tomorrow at 8. Thanks to my team today and to my brilliant guests, including Kelvin, and most importantly, thanks to you for your company. It's been a busy show. We'll do it all again tomorrow at 8. Next up, here's the weather.
Hello again, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office. Increasingly cloudy for most of us over the next 24 hours. That cloud bringing some outbreaks of rain in places, but it will also bring milder air with it. The air coming in around an area of high pressure, west to southwesterly winds. And of course, at this time of year, those winds are relatively mild, helped by the fact that a warm front is crossing the UK. That's going to bring a milder spell, but also a lot of cloud and some outbreaks of rain. The rain mainly focused across parts of Scotland, outbreaks of rain on and off through the night. Northern Ireland, likewise, a few spells of rain into northern England at times. 1 or 2 spots couldn't be ruled out for the Welsh mountains, but elsewhere across England and Wales, largely dry, albeit relatively cloudy. And for the vast majority, it is frost-free, although chillier conditions in the far northeast ahead of the rain. That rain does push northeast as we start off Thursday, wet weather arriving into Shetland and Orkney, but it's persisting across the West Highlands, and the Northwest Highlands in particular will see some very soggy weather over the next 36 hours. Elsewhere across the country, generally cloudy, a few spots of rain across western hills and coasts, but otherwise mostly dry and mild. This west to southwesterly wind bringing temperatures of 10 to 13 Celsius widely up and down the country. But it does stay wet across Scotland, especially later Thursday. Overnight, eventually the rain turns more showery and some clearer conditions into the far north. There'll also be a few light outbreaks of rain pushing into western parts of England, Wales, Northern Ireland. Another cloudy night across the board, and as a result, frost-free as we start off Friday. In fact, it's really quite mild first thing Friday, 9 to 10 Celsius in places, but it's also grey, and the lowest cloud will be over northern and western hills with further outbreaks of rain crossing Scotland. Not as heavy or as persistent on Friday, and into the weekend another spell of rain for the far north, but eventually that clears to sunnier skies, albeit with chillier conditions for Sunday.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show, Farage.